Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. So Corax week is underway, and today we discuss the aftermath of the drop site massacre and the mental toll this has taken on the Raven Guard Primarch. Spoiler warning to begin, the events we are discussing today are from the short story Raven's Flight by Gav Thorpe. As always, I really recommend you read the story for yourself first, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. Not only that, we help to support the great Games Workshop and Black Library, because without them we don't have this amazing lore to talk about. I will put a link in the description as always. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, the first we see of Corax and the Raven Guard in the aftermath of Istvan. They are emerging from the wreckage of a downed Thunderhawk gunship, a couple of kilometers away from the site of the massacre. Many of his sons are wounded. At least 75% of his legion is already lost, and most likely up to 90%. Even Corax, a Primarch, cannot simply process that kind of weighty information as if it was nothing. Each and every one of those percentages equals countless of his own sons, massacred at the hands of those he called brothers. Taking a moment, he turns away from his sons and gazes to the distant smoke rising from the battlefield. A father grieving for his lost sons. A brother mourning the loss of his siblings. This is a very true moment. Despite the image of white-faced, raven-haired warrior, Corax is undoubtedly one of the most human Primarchs, and for all his brutalness of war, or perhaps because of it, he retains that aspect of humanity within him. There's a touching moment in Deliverance Lost, where Corax reflects on the fact that he'd actually be quite happy retired on Terra after the Great Crusade, alongside his father and brothers. He assumes he'd most likely have written a book about his life learnings. And this is the quality of the man of Corax. He may be a master of war, but he is no monster for it. But this moment of grief is all he allows himself, and his mind swiftly turns back to the tactical situation at hand. And it's not long before the enemy come in their pursuit. From the vantage point high above the mountainside, despite being out of sight, Corax alone can detect just who their pursuers are. The grind of treads, the particular rumble of motors, picking out exact totals and numbers. The Iron Warriors come. There was no love lost between Corax and Perturabo before the betrayal. Two completely contrasting methods of war. But now, it was nothing but utter hatred. And while Perturabo may not be present himself, his sons were about to realise the Raven Guard were far from done. Aside from the Marines themselves, this force of Iron Warriors were coming, with 14 Rhinos, 3 Land Raiders, 6 Predators, and 3 Thunderstrikes. Corax and the Raven Guard survivors annihilated them all. This was their theatre of war, and if the Iron Warriors thought the Raven Guard easy prey, they could not be more mistaken. However, it's in the aftermath of this battle that we get a further glimpse into the mind of the Primarch. As the Raven Guard hole up in shelter amid a storm, Corax, shed of his armour, leaves his sons to seek sign of his fellow loyal legions, the Iron Hands and Salamanders. As Corax journeys, he reaches an outlook able to view the drop site itself, and as he does so, his heart sinks. Dropships and banners of all the traitor legions are clear to see, Corax never dreamed so many could turn from the Emperor's light. And despite his head telling him not to do so, he just has to investigate further. And so he presses on, returning to the drop site itself, the heart of the enemy. Now, how is Corax able to risk such a feat? Well, as all the Primarchs, Corax possesses some manner of psychic power, and his power is to seemingly become invisible, if he so chooses. Not literally invisible, he appears to use his powers to influence the minds of others, that he simply isn't there. So much so, that even if he appears on a sensor sweep, they would simply disregard the reading. The only other being in the galaxy who knew Corax possessed such a gift: his father, the Emperor of Mankind. And as he stalks into the nest of vipers, Corax's mind wanders back to their first meeting, his father telling him he would never have to hide again. How ironic those words were now. Passing by the enemy encampments, Corax soon presses into the battlefield, walking amid the countless dead. The black of his son's armour intermingled with the green of salamanders. And then he spies the bodies of the Iron Hands upon the hillside, who rush to follow their own Primarch in battle, the Gorgon, Ferrus Manus. Corax knelt beside the body of a Raven Guard, his chestplate rent open. His armour bore the markings of a veteran, one of those that had come from Terra, and made Deliverance his new home. Corax had seen untold atrocities, and in the name of enlightenment and the future, had even committed a few. Of these he was not proud, but he was sure that his cause had always been just. He had seen the slavers throttle babies to punish their mothers, and bloodthirsty crave fall upon columns of refugees. Never once had any of it caused Corax the slightest hesitation. War was not glorious. It was a desperate, messy business. But it had been his business, one in which he had excelled. This massacre, it was beyond the pale. For the first and last time in his life, Corax cried. He cried not for the loss of life, though it was great. He cried not for the degradation that had been heaped upon his dead warriors, though it was obscene. He cried for all Space Marines, for the shame that Horus had brought upon them. They had been the Emperor's trusted sword, and they had betrayed him. It mattered not that Corax himself had remained loyal. He was one of the Legiones Astartes, and the shame of one was the shame of all. "Will they ever trust us again?" he whispered, as a single tear rolled down his cheek and dropped onto the fallen Raven Guard. Should they trust us, was the next question, one that Corax did not want to ask, and certainly could not answer. The Emperor made us gods, and mankind followed us. Corax fought heavily. In us he poured the hopes and dreams of humanity, and we raised ourselves up above them. He gave us armies to command, and the resources of the galaxy to draw upon. What have we done with that? When we first awoke, what did we do with the power he gave us? Set ourselves up as warrior kings, with planets as vassals, and star systems as our fiefdoms. Not all of us follow Horus, but none of us are beyond blame. Perhaps it is better not to trust us. Perhaps the galaxy is better ruled by normal men, who live and die, and whose ambitions are not so grand. Depression weighed down Corax as he continued his search. There was no sign of Ferrus Manus or Vulcan, though he did not know whether that boded well or ill. There was but one truth to face. The Salamanders and Iron Hands were no more. If aid was to come, it would come from outside Istvan. The Raven Guard would have to fight alone. The effect of this tragedy all too clear in the faults of the Raven Lord here. As any human, you can almost see his mind working through the myriad of emotions, the ones we all go through when confronted with tragedy. The grief, the despair, the searching for blame, and the questions of reasoning. But if anyone has ever experienced such things, as most of us have in different manners, you can easily understand how and why Corax is having such thoughts. Yes, he is a Primarch, a demigod warrior, but as we always see, he is still human. And without doubt the biggest flaw in all the Primarchs is their understanding of that. Corax gets a lot of stick from some people for his eventual fall into a seeming depression. But I think in him processing these emotions, he actually goes through one of the most interesting story arcs, and definitely one that we can understand and relate to the most. We can see now in the current timeline with Guilliman just how much a Primarch can struggle mentally. Corax here is quite literally amid a field of dead. Hundreds of thousands of his own lost sons. He is processing the still very raw emotions. For truly, the very first time since the event. For the first and last time in his life, Corax cried. He cried not for the loss of life, though it was great. He cried not for the degradation that had been heaped upon his dead warriors, though it was obscene. He cried for all Space Marines, for the shame that Horus had brought upon them. They had been the Emperor's trusted sword, and they had betrayed him. "Will they ever trust us again?" he whispered, as a single tear rolled down his cheek and dropped on to the fallen Raven Guard. That is such a truly powerful passage, and it shows you just how much Corax is letting these events play on his mind. He is trying to come to terms with the entire ordeal, not just the loss of his own sons, but the loss of the dream he was created for, the only true purpose he has ever known, the dream of his father. This is a very underrated moment in the heresy. This very honest and simple moment to me lays the very foundations of every Corax action to come. His desperation to continue the fight, to exact a measure of revenge, to redeem himself in the eyes of his father, and to continue the legacy of his legion. But as always guys, what do you think? Can you understand just why Corax is processing these emotions right now? Do you think it makes sense? Or do you think it is out of character? Can you maybe relate to this measure of doubt, this moment of grief, and this fear of the future, this loss of a dream? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below. I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers. Your support truly means a lot to me. It really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again tomorrow as Corax Week continues.